Masechet Yevamot, Daf Chet. We are continuing and will nearly complete our journey today regarding the question of how do we know that when we have a contradiction between two pisukim, Yibbum on the one hand that says, yeah, you have to perform Yibbum, even though it's brother's wife, which is normally erva, is still permitted. Versus what if it's a case where not only it's a brother's wife, but also two brothers marry two sisters, and one brother dies, it would be also marrying wife's sister, and that's another prohibition. Can you do Yibbum even in that case? So we know the answer is no, because of the pasuk of aleha, which teaches me that the prohibition applies in all cases. It says the word aleha here. It says the word aleha here. We're going to ask today, why not learn the opposite way and say it's permitted in both cases? Okay, but so far we were assuming that's prohibited in both cases. But then we're wondering, why do we even need such a rule when we can assume the opposite rule, that anytime you have a prohibition, the prohibition will, especially a prohibition like this that has karet, will override the positive commandment, which is less significant. And so we've gone through a couple of answers and rejected the first two. Today, we're going to finish C and see two more answers that will all be accepted. So C, D, and E will all be accepted. All right, so we're going to finish off C, which is a generalization from the brother's wife, that just like the brother's wife is permitted, that's the regular case of Yibbum, is in fact the brother's wife. So too will generalize from there to any other arayot. And now if you should tell me, yeah, but if it's a different case of arayot, like my brother's wife is also my wife's sister, well, then that's two prohibitions. Who said you can violate two prohibitions? And we answered with since a brother's wife is permitted, so too a wife's sister is permitted. And the language of this was, we can learn ho'il v'ishtereh ishtereh. Once something is permitted, then it's for one reason, it's permitted for another reason. The proof for that was from a Mesorah, who on his 8th day needs to come to the Bet HaMikdash and put his thumb and toe into the Chatzed, even though he is not yet tahor and he really can't come into the Chatzed, but the Torah gives him permission. He has a pass. If that person should become a Baal Keri on that very day, on that 8th day, a Baal Keri normally cannot go up to Har HaBayit at all. But we apply the rule, once you're permitted, for one reason, you're permitted. Once a Mesorah is permitted to come to the Chatzed, so too, we give permission. He already has a pass, and the Baal Keri can come. So that's how we learned that rule. And so far, so good. But now we're going to ask, are these two cases actually equivalent? Let me give one word of introduction about this case that Ula brought, which is, it only works. You only say, if first he became, during the day, he woke up and he was tahor and he was fine as the 8th day, and he's ready to go to the Bet HaMikdash. So he has a pass, he can go. If he becomes Baal Keri all of a sudden during the day, before he gets a chance to come to the Bet HaMikdash, that is when we apply that since he has a pass already, he has permission, so the prohibition of a Baal Keri does not apply, he's protected. But what if the timing was wrong? What if he became a Baal Keri the night before? The night before, he does not yet have permission to come to Bet HaMikdash. Bet HaMikdash is closed, and before that, he didn't have permission. And so, if he becomes a Baal Keri first, before sunrise, then since he's already prohibited from coming to the Chatzed, that in that case, the 8th day, the Mesorah permission does not undo the Baal Keri. Right? So, in other words, this rule of ishtereh only applies when he was totally permitted. Then it prevents a new prohibition from coming in the first place. But if he was already prohibited before, then it will not work. Okay, so that not knowing that, let's compare it to the various cases, 3 different cases actually, of Yibbum, of two brothers married to 2 sisters. The question is, who gets married first? We can apply the rule if the dead brother got married first. Obviously, he's not getting married while he's dead. It means the brother who was going to die, first marries one sister, and then the brother who will live, who is the Yavam, we can call him the Yavam, he then marries the other sister afterwards. Because the prohibition of the Yavam, the prohibition started first, right? First, the Yevamah was his brother's sister and prohibited, and only then the other prohibition was added on top of it when the Yavam married his wife. And so in that order, it would make sense. Ela nasa chai v'achar kach nasa met isur achot isha kadem. But if the Yavam first marries one of the women, and then the brother who eventually will die then marries the other, so in that case, the Yevamah was first prohibited to him as a wife's sister. And that prohibition, that's like a Baal Kedi coming first. That prohibition is just absolute and nothing can undo it. And only then, on top of that prohibition, comes the Isur of Achot, of Eshet Ach. And so because it comes later, it does not have any power to undo the prior prohibition. So in this case, we would know that it's prohibited and we wouldn't need the derasha of aleha, but in this case, we would. Even within this case, we're actually going to distinguish between two more possibilities. So va'afilu nasa met nameh, even if the deceased brother marries first, tenachecha de nasa met umet. It will only make sense that we need this derasha if the brother who will be deceased, he marries and dies before the Yavam ever gets married. And so in that case, v'achar kach nasa chai. And so in that, and only after he dies, then the living brother marries the sister. Because in that case, the Yavam would be actually permitted to the Yavamah in the meantime. Again, one brother, the one who's going to die, marries and he dies without children. At that point, the Yavam, this is just a regular plain old case, the Yavam would be permitted to the Yevamah, although it's his brother's wife. That's the classic case. So now we have a permission, right, a special pass to violate that law of arayot, his brother's wife. This guy, instead of doing Yibbum, which he really should do, she's waiting around, he's waiting around. In the meantime, he goes and marries the Yevamah's sister. Okay, well, that's permitted because they're not yet related. So he marries the sister. Now that is a second prohibition that supposed to come upon something that is actually permitted. In that case, that's when it protects. So since he already has a pass to marry the Yevamah, which is totally permitted, so then a new potential prohibition will not come upon it. So that is the case where it would make sense then that we might think it's allowed and we need aleha to come say it's not allowed. But in the opposite subcase, ela de nasa met velo met, if the brother who will be deceased marries and remains alive, and then v'achar kach nasa chai, and then the Yavam, the one who will be Yavam, marries the sister. So now they're both alive at the same time, and only then the brother dies. In that case, there never was a time when the Yavam would have been permitted to the Yevamah, because while his brother was alive, he married the sister, and so she would be a sister-in-law already, his wife's sister, already while the brother is alive, before there is any permission. After all, here's the proof, as I explained before. Mila modeh ula she'im ra'a keri belel shemini she'en machnis yadav libhanot. Even Ula, who was the originator of this whole principle that once something is allowed, he would agree that if this mitzorah saw keri at night on the 9th, and in that case, the prohibition came first. In that case, he cannot put his thumb and toe into the chaser on the 8th day, because you would not apply. There was never a time of permission. There never was such a time. He only says it's permitted when in the morning of the 8th he wakes up and he can go to the Bet HaMikdash, and so then becomes a Baal Keri. In that case, the pass for sarat applies and protects him against the prohibition that Keri would bring. So too here, so too here, we only need the word aleha to teach me the not so in this one case when the one brother marries, dies without children, is a Yevamot then, is allowed to marry the brother, and only then the living brother marries the sister instead. That is an equivalent case. So even though it's only in one out of three cases, nevertheless, it is a good answer. We need aleha for that case. Okay, very good. So now we have one reason why we need aleha, and why we would think otherwise by making a generalization. Okay, the next answer, the fourth answer, is going to be similar to the third one. We're also making a generalization, just in a slightly different way. We're linking all arayot to a brother's wife, or just like a brother's wife is permitted to do Yibbum. That's the classic case. So too, all arayot should be the same. Why should be the same? Let's see. Another answer. Yonah. The one before was a mematzinu, like a binyan av. Just like you have it here, so too you have it here. This is a hekesh, which is a little different. It's a little stronger, less prone to questions. Rabbi Yonah. Rabbi Yonah said, "Vitema Rav Huna bered Rav Yoshua." Okay, two possible authors. Rabbi Yonah said this in a different context altogether. We're just borrowing it for our purposes here. He said, "Amar kera ki kol asher ya'aseh mikol ha'to'evot ha'eleh v'nichretu." This is the ending summary pasuk of Vayikra 18. That's the list of all the arayot, and in the end it said everybody on the list above gets karet, and they're all the same. Hukshu kol arayot kulan le'eshet ach, and one of the arayot, one of the lists, one of the people on the list is eshet ach. And since they're all categorized as the same with this ending, so they're all connected to each other, and therefore all connected to eshet ach. Ma eshet ach sharia, af kol arayot nameh sharian kasharian katavra chamana aleha. Okay, Rabbi Yonah said this regarding a different thing. His question was, how much of a sexual act do you need to do in order for it to be considered a sexual act? How much penetration? Even a little bit. Okay, but it doesn't matter. We're applying it to a different matter, to say as follows. Just like in the case of eshet ach, the classic case of Yibbum, which is the wife of his brother, and that's permitted for the Yavam to marry his brother's wife to perform Yibbum. So too, all arayot also, we might have thought, we make a hekesh and they're all the same. And then that means someone could perform Yibbum even if it's his wife's sister, or maybe even other arayot. So therefore, we need the pasuk to say aleha. Aleha is found in a wife's sister, and in Yibbum to say no, it's not, it's prohibited. Okay, so that's his answer. מקדי כל ההריות איכה לאקושין הוא לאשת אח ואיכה לאקושין הוא לאחות אישה. מה יחזה את הקש לאחות אישה הקשין הוא לאשת אח? Okay, now we have a good question, which is, why I understand this hekesh, but all the cases of arayot are all compared to eshet ach. That's true because that's on the list, but they're also all compared with each other, including achot isha. So when you say the summary pasuk, they all have the same law. Whatever you say in one, you say for all. Why did you decide to compare the arayot to achot isha? Why not? Juxtapose them. Why did you juxtapose them with the wife's sister to say it's not allowed, aleha? Why not say, they're all juxtaposed with eshet ach, and then your conclusion would be that all arayot are permitted. You can override any arayot with in the case of Yibbum. Okay, so pretty good question. Like, why put the arrow this way? Why not turn it the other way and say they're all permitted? So one answer is that anytime you can make a hekesh and you have two possibilities of openings available. It could be for leniency or for stringency. You have to assume for stringency, because if the Torah is comparing them, then it's telling you to be stringent. If it wanted to be lenient, it'd have to tell you that you can be lenient. Or or a second answer is when other cases of arayot are more similar to a wife's sister, in that they both would have two prohibitions, whereas for a brother's wife is only one prohibition, right? Brother's wife is really only one prohibition, and Yibbum says you can do it. If it's a case of a wife's sister, well, then that would be the brother's wife and wife's sister. And so since that one is two prohibitions, that's more like the daughter's, the brother's wife is also the Yevam's daughter, or any of the other relations are all two isurim. And so it makes sense to conclude that they are prohibited, even though we would have thought that maybe we should compare them all to eshetach. No, we don't. Aleha teaches us not to, and aleha is in fact more similar, and that is the end of D of that answer. Okay, and now we're going to have Rava as the long answer here. He is actually going to go back and say, in fact, a negative commandment that has karet overrides a positive. So everything that we've been assuming until now, that the other way around, he says, no, is not true. And in fact, if we only had these two pisukim, I would assume two sisters, which is prohibition with karet, overrides Yibbum. And therefore, I don't need aleha to tell me that. It's not allowed. So why do I need the word aleha? For something completely different. I don't need aleha to tell me that the sister is prohibited, but rather that the sister's cowife is prohibited, or a cowife in any case of arayot, right? So obviously the Yavam cannot perform Yibbum with one of his relatives. That's just a negative with karet. Except for the brother's wife, but any other relative is not allowed. That is obvious. But if the deceased had another wife who's not related to anyone, then there's no reason why that would not be allowed. They're not related, they're not arayot. So that's why I need the word aleha to prohibit a cowife. All right, we're going to have some challenges to that. And in the end, we're going to say, no, aleha, actually, we need aleha, because we're going to say that we know aleha is already prohibited from another source, because she's also negative with karet, we're going to prove. In the end, we're going to say we need the aleha to actually permit a cowife outside of Yibbum. So, for example, if someone's daughter marries someone, and that guy, his son-in-law, marries also someone else who's not related at all, and then they divorce or he dies, in that case, the father would still be allowed to marry his daughter's co-wife, right? There's no problem with that. So we need aleha actually to permit that case. We will challenge it, but that challenge will be upheld. Okay, so that's good to keep the general outline here, because the details may get complex. Rava Amar, Rava la sericha kera. He said, I don't need the pasuk of aleha or any other pasuk to tell me that a case where the Yevamah is also related in another way of arayot. I don't need a pasuk to tell me that. The en aseh doche lo taseh sheyesh bo karet, because the final ruling is a negative commandment. A positive commandment does not override a negative commandment that has karet. That is Rava's conclusion. Okay, what is the halacha, which someone asked in the chat? Is a good question. Rambam does not codify it. Rishonim are on different sides of it. So this is it's inconclusive whether halacha is like Rava or not. But certainly, at least Rava says no, and therefore we don't need any pasuk to tell me this, because a wife's sister is erva, and that's with karet. So that will certainly override the positive commandment of Yibbum. I don't need a pasuk for that case, but I do need a pasuk to tell me that the co-wife is prohibited. Okay, Now we're going to challenge this. Is it really true that the adva herself, like the sister's wife, the wife's sister, does not need a kira v'hatanya and the elahi? The baraita, everything. This is, we're already in daf chet, but we've been discussing the very same issue all the way since the beginning. This is like this long sugya is like a symphony. It's a masterpiece of how long it is and how intricate. Okay, so we're referring to the baraita that opened this whole discussion, and just in case you don't know it by heart, I did bring it here. So this is back from Daf Gimel, and in this derasha, in Midrash Halacha, we say, okay, fine, en li ela hi. From what we learned before, I know that the edva is prohibited. Oh, but how about cowife? How do we know that? And then we have to bring another pasuk, litzrod, and then we say, fine, I only know the cowife. What about the cowife's cowife, right? In that other case, when there's a third brother, and then we need litzrod. It could have said latzod, instead it says litzrod. So you see in the steps of this midrash halacha, it's assuming that we did need a derivation for her herself, aleha, for the edva herself. And then the question is, what about sarata? So this it's hard to read Rava into this, because Rava says, no, we need aleha for sarata. But here it said, fine, I already know elahi from aleha, and sarata we have from another word. That is the question. It really is a good question. So we're going to push an answer into it. And so we say, no, well, what I mean is mishum sarata. How do I know that I should prohibit the co-wife based on the edva herself, right? So I know that edva herself is prohibited from the general rule that a negative would override a positive. But what I want to know is, how will I know that, oh, fine, that the edva is prohibited enough that even her co-wife would also be prohibited? That's what we meant by that. Okay, the hakatani, and what about the next line? Ela enli ela hen, enla and the hen. So now I know that Sarah. How do I know that the rival of the rival, the co-wife of the co-wife? It sounds like we already know that. No, what we mean there is also going to be the same thing. Mishum sarotehen. All right, how do I know that I would prohibit a co-wife so that then I can also derive that the co-wife's co-wife is prohibited? That's what's meant by the structure of that baraita. Okay, tashema. Now another question. Rabbi Omer velakach ulkacha v'yibem v'yibemah le'sor sarot v'arayot. Because Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, we're going to come back to this at the end of the sugya. So remember that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said this. He has a question, which is from the extra hair and the mapik in the hair from the main pasuk in Devarim that says, she should not, the Yevamot should not go and marry outside to a foreign person, but rather Yevamot, Yavo aleha ulkacha. So in Peshat, it just means Yavam Shelah, right? Her brother-in-law should come upon her, ul velakach otah, right? That's what the extra hair says, and marry her as leisha, as a wife, and perform Yibbum ve'yibemaha. Okay, good. So that's ve'yibem ota, and perform Yibbum upon her. That's what the extra hair is doing. So it makes sense in Peshat. Nevertheless, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is making a derasha, and it says, it could have just said belakach, or you could have said belakach without any ota, without ulkacha. Ve'yibem, you don't have to say ve'yibema. So what are those two extra letters coming to teach me? Le'esor sarot v'arayot, to prohibit sarot and arayot. What do you see here? That the Rabbi Yehuda Nasi did require a derivation to prohibit not only sarot but also arayot herself. And Rava, you just said, I already know arayot are prohibited on my own from the general rule that negative overrides a positive, and I don't need any derivation. But Rabbi Yehuda Nasi needed a derivation, right? It's true, it's a different one from the aleha derivation, but so learn from one or the other. You need somewhere to learn it from. You can't just assume it. Okay, good question. You know, maybe you got the wrong word. You missed a word here. What we meant when we said, we didn't say lasor sarot and arayot, but rather the co-wives of arayot, right? Arayot we already know. This is the co-wives of. No, you can't be, because after all, the B brings two pesukim. This ulkacha and Yibema means he's learning two separate things, right? My love chad le'erva vechad le'sara. So you can't just add the word shel. It won't solve your problem. That's not what it means. La idi v'idi le'sara. Chad le'mesar sara b'makom misvah vechad le'mishreh sara shelo b'makom misvah. And so we say, no, maybe in fact it works. We need two words. Both of them are regarding the cowife. One of the words is going to prohibit the cowife in the case of Yibbum, that means b'mkom mitzvah, that since one cowife is prohibited because she's related, so too her cowife is also prohibited. And we need the other one to permit a cowife when it's not a case of Yibbum. Okay, my ta'ama. How do you read that into the Pesukim? Okay, v'yibem b'makom yibum hu da'asira sara. So when we come and say v'yibem, so it's coming to add to say v'yibem otaha. You're allowed to do yibum in a regular case with your brother sister, but only that case. And not another woman. So which other woman? Well, if the one of the wives is an erva to the yavam, then this is going to prohibit also the sarah. So that's one of them. Now shelo b'mkom yibum sharia sarah. The other word says ulkacha, and you may marry. So this is coming to include, be lenient on someone who you may marry. When can I marry? Let's say a daughter's cowife. Well, in a case that's not Yibbum, right? And what I said before, a daughter happens to marry someone who also marries a foreigner, not related, and they get divorced. So then the father of the daughter can marry the cowife. And so that I learned from the other word, ulkacha. All right, so far, so good. And Rabbi is going to prove that this is so, and this will support Rava. Amar Rab Asher matnitin lamedaika dekatani 15 nashim potrot sarotehem. It says there are 15 related women who cause their co-wives to be free of the obligation of Yibbum, and also it cannot do Yibbum. And the Mishnah does not say that they themselves are exempt and they cause their co-wives to be exempt. It doesn't have to say that, because that's already obvious. I don't have to tell you that a person cannot do Yibbum with his relative. So it doesn't even have to say piturot. The whole chidush is that they are poter, they exempt even the daughters or relatives' co-wife. And so the language of the Mishnah, in fact, supports supports everything that we've said before, supports Rava. Okay, Rava is not off the hook yet. Another question. Umay shana erva de la serichi kera de'en aseh doche lo ta'aseh sheyesh bo karet. Sara name lo tiba kera mishum de'en aseh. How come you said that the erva herself, let's say the wife's sister, does not need an extra pasuk, any pasuk of aleha or any other pasuk, because I have the rule that a positive commandment does not override a negative commandment with karet. The sarah herself, the cowife herself, is also an erva in this case, and does not need another pasuk to tell me that. Why is erva herself? Because remember back in that baraita that we quoted on Daf Gimel, it said there that we learn it from litzror. So here there's a pasuk that says that the co-wife is called litzror, and therefore, since you're learning it from pasuk, and the pasuk is about erva, so she also is erva. And since we have a summary pasuk saying everybody gets karet, everyone on the list, that would include the person that we derive from lisrod, which is the case of the co-wife. And so therefore, once you accept that, then you don't need another pasuk of aleha to tell me otherwise, because I would assume to begin with that it's prohibited, as in any other case of erva. The co-wife is the same as the wife who's related. Okay, Amar le Rav Acha bar bevai mol Ravina. Hachi kamrinan mishme de Rava. okay, you know what? In fact, we're going to introduce a new understanding. I'll just go back to the outline, right? So this is the challenge that we just had. So now aleha, we thought was to prohibit a co-wife. Now we're going to say actually the opposite. I think what you find in these long complex sugiyot is often the Talmud will introduce answers that it knows are wrong, but you kind of need the building blocks in order to get to the right answer. It's kind of a really good pedagogy, because you wouldn't understand the right answer unless you went through all the steps of the wrong answer. And I think in all these cases, a lot of the elements that we see in the arguments of the answers that are rejected end up being necessary for the correct answer. All right, so now the word aleha is actually coming to teach me the opposite. I might have thought that co-wives, even outside of Yibbum, right? Any such case would be prohibited. Another example might be my aunt. If my aunt married a man who also had another wife and they divorced, so I would be allowed to marry my aunt's co-wife. That's permitted, but I might have thought it's prohibited, and I need aleha to permit that case. Okay, we're going to see a challenge. So, because in that case, well, why not permit arayot, all arayot outside of Yibbum? This is a really crazy thing to even think, that all arayot would be just permitted. But we're going to say, no, it can't be, because of the pasuk regarding a sister that says bechayeha, in her lifetime. And we're going to analyze that pasuk in terms of its being plural and singular, as we'll see in a moment. Okay, so now a new understanding of Rava. Sara name la istirich kera, ki istirich kera lemishre Sara shelo b'mkom mitzvah. This is your right. In the case of Yibbum, I already know that there's a prohibition against any of these cases of the erva or her co-wife. But I would need a pasuk to tell me that if it's not a case of Yibbum, then I would be allowed to marry my aunt's husband's other wife. My ta'ama, amar kera aleha. Bimkom aleha hu da'asira, shelo bimkom aleha sharia. So aleha comes to the gezerah shava with between the wife's sister and the case of Yibbum, to say when is a erva and her co-wife prohibited? The co-wife is only prohibited when it's aleha, meaning in a case of Yibbum. But if it's not a case of Yibbum, where the word aleha is connected, then it would be permitted. Okay. Amar le Rami bar Chama le Rava. Right. The case here, if we just want to apply the permitted case to a wife's sister, because that's the context of aleha, would be if my wife's sister is married to some guy, and that guy has another wife, and they divorce. So then I would be permitted to marry that other wife. Right, that is in fact permitted, and so we need the word aleha to say, don't think it's like Yibbum where it's prohibited. No, it's only prohibited in aleha; it's permitted otherwise. Good. Amar le Rami bar Chama le Rava. Ema erva gufe shelo bimkom misvah tishtereh. Now here's the really crazy line. So according to this, why not say that her erva herself, if it's not a case of Yibbum, should be permitted? Because since the word aleha says that when do we prohibit a co-wife or erva? Only case of Yibbum. So just like you say, only case of Yibbum, and if not case of non-Yibbum, I'm permitted to my wife's sister's co-wife. So say only case of Yibbum, am I prohibited for my wife's sister, and otherwise it would be permitted. And all other arayot. This is actually thinking that all arayot are just permitted as long as it's not Yibbum, which is kind of paradoxical. So that's exactly Rava's answer. If you're not allowed to do Yibbum with your wife's sister or daughter or aunt or any of these cases, in the case of Yibbum where it's a mitzvah, then all the more so when there's no mitzvah, there's less of a reason to. So Rava's like, this doesn't make any sense what you said. Okay, but nevertheless, Rami bar Chama can answer. Rami bar Chama, by the way, is known for his very theoretical, strange cases that he challenges other sages with. And, sometimes they don't tolerate it. And they get into heated personal insult. But in this case, we take it seriously, and Rava answers all his questions. So, Amar Leh, Sarah Tochiach. So Rabbi Chama says the case of the co-wife will prove that your kavachomet is not correct, because after all, with the co-wife, in the case of Yibbum, that's when a daughter's co-wife is prohibited. But if it was not a case of Yibbum, then the daughter's co-wife would be permitted. And so, right, your kavachomet logic does not work. Okay, Rava answers, Amar le, aleha, amar kera, bechayeha, kol shebechayeha. That's why the pasuk says, precisely for your reason, it says the word bechayeha. Let's look at the pasuk regarding a wife's sister. Visha lachota lo tikach, a man may not marry a woman and her sister, because litzror, in which case the two sisters will be co-wives. Legalot ervata, aleha, bechayeha, to reveal her nakedness, a euphemism to have relations with her in her lifetime. Okay, two sisters is unique among the list in that it only applies when the two sisters are both alive. If I was married to one woman and she died and she was alive and I divorced, I still would not be able to marry her sister. Only if she died, then I would be allowed to marry the sister. Okay, so from the fact that it says that you have to wait till one of them dies, proves that while they're alive, it's prohibited. And therefore, arayot are prohibited, right? There's no way that you can explain this pasuk, Rami Bar Chama, if you use your kal vachomer and say all arayot are permitted. Well, then this would be permitted. Why would you have to say bechayeha, meaning anytime she's alive? So bechayeha, kol shebechayeha, anytime she's alive. Okay, Rami Bar Chama challenges and says, "Hi bechayeha miba lemuta lachar mita. Hahi me." Yes, so no, we need bechayeha to teach me that to limit, to exclude the time after death. In other words, after death, then it would be permitted in all cases. So no, we still need to know that no matter what. No, no, I could learn that from isha elachota, a woman and her sister, right? You're not going to call them a woman and her sister if there's only one, if only one of them is alive. You wouldn't say that. So I already know that from isha elachota. And so this chayeha therefore is not needed to tell me that after death is permitted. And we say, counter, I me ve'isha lachota, hava amina nitkarsha sharia. Talmud omar bechayeha, kol shebechayeha, daf agav de nitkaresha la. No, if I had it from there, I would think, isha lachota, maybe that's, they're alive, but if I divorce one, then the other one is permitted. If I only had isha lachota. So that's why I need chayeha to teach me that as long as one of them are alive, even if one is divorced, it's prohibited. And therefore, we do in fact need bechayeha for the simple case. At this point, Rava is challenged because he wanted to try to use the word bechayeha to show that, in fact, no matter what, if a sister is alive, then it's not one is not allowed to be with her, no matter what the case, even if it's not b'mkom mitzvah. And so he was trying to use that to undo Rami Bar Chama's insane proposition that all arayot would be permitted. What are you going to do with this word? But Rami Bar Chama in the end says, no, I need the word to tell me the plain old law that the law of two sisters is only prohibited when both are alive. And I wouldn't know that from Misha Lachota, because then they might both be alive but divorced, and still is not allowed. When they're divorced, one has to be dead in order for the other one to be alive. And so since you need it for just that case, it's not necessarily true that applies even in a non-Yibbum context. Maybe that's only true in a Yibbum context. And so therefore, Rava is still challenged, and so he has to give another possibility. Ela amad Rav Huna bar Tachlifa Mishmeh de Rava. In the name of Rava, they'll answer. Tere kera'e ketive. Ketib isha el achota lo tikach lisror. Uchtiv legalot ervata. Dehada mashma. And so here the question is in that very pasuk, isha lachota, and the continuation of the pasuk, are in different numbers. Isha lachota lo tikach. So that's two people are here, right? A woman and her sister. Do not marry both of them. And now litzror legarot. It should have been ervatan alehen bechayehen, because after all, they are now going to be both arayot. Both of them are going to be arayot to each other. Someone, the man, the husband who was with either one, both of them are arayot, and they're, since there's two of them, should say bechayehen. So why does it start with singular and end with plural? That's his question. And so what we're looking for again is a proof that arayot are prohibited in a non-Yibbum context. Okay, וכתיב לגלות לבתן, דחדה משמעה כיצד, במקום מצווה שתהן אסורות, שלא במקום מצווה היא אסורה ושרתה מותרת. So the beginning of the pasuk, which is in plural, because it mentions isha and achota, that's talking about a case of Yibbum, where both of them are prohibited. Good. Whereas when it's not a mitzvah, meaning both the erva and the sara are prohibited. When it's not a case of mitzvah, then hi asura, it's true, the sister is prohibited, but sarata, her co-wife, is permitted, and that's why he uses a singular to teach me that. And so now everything's good, right? So Rava can use this darasha to prove that in fact, in a regular case, bimkom mitzvah is prohibited, but in a regular case, tzara would be permitted. But then we challenge that. Epuch ana, we could use the same logic and just switch them around. How do you know which one is the one bimkom mitzvah and which one is not? You could say bimkom mitzvah hi asura besarata muteret. In the case of Yibbum, that's when one cannot perform Yibbum with his wife's sister, but the co-wife would be okay, because at least it's a mitzvah, and you could do Yibbum that way. Beshelo bimkom mitzvah, but if it's just a regular case of a wife's sister who married, a regular case of a wife's sister who married some guy, and then that guy divorced his other wife, that I could marry the other wife, that would be prohibited. So that's just as good the other way around. No, imken lo yomad aleha. No, in that case, it would not say the extra word aleha. Why do you need this word aleha? It teaches that the prohibition regard to a rival wife applies only when there is a mitzvah of aleha, meaning a case of Yibbum. There you go. So the word aleha tells me that it's the case of Yibbum that is the plural one when everybody is prohibited, because aleha is in the second half of the pasuk. So the extra word aleha, why do we need that extra word? To connect it with Yibbum. And so therefore there must be an extra prohibition. In the case of Yibbum, that would apply not just to an erva. Erva is prohibited in all cases, but to say that in Yibbum, even the co-wife is prohibited. That's why aleha is connecting to Yibbum. But that's challenged too. How do you know that the word aleha is connecting to Yibbum to say it's prohibited? Maybe it's in fact to say that it would be permitted. Just like in Yibbum, right, is a permissive law, so too it's coming here to tell me that Yibbum is more lenient, and you could marry the co-wife in the case of Yibbum and not in a regular case. לא היא ולא שרתה, שלא במקום עליה, במקום עליה שתהן מותרות. Here you could read the whole pasuk like this, that you cannot marry two sisters and make them co-wives, and you can't, lo lisrod, and lisrod means the co-wife of the sister. So you cannot marry not my wife's sister and not my wife's sister's co-wife. That's in a regular case. Shelo bimkom aleha, when it's not aleha, aleha, you can substitute the word Yibbum, shelo b'mkom Yibbum, because that's the connection. But if it is a case of aleha of Yibbum, then perhaps they are allowed. Shetehen mutarot. You can marry the cowife in such a case. Shetehen, I don't know, maybe even the one woman herself, the erva herself. Oh no, imken legalot erva dechada hechi mashkachat la. No, in that case, you see, it says uncover nakedness. It says that in singular, only one. And so then, and according to this, everyone would be permitted. So someone has to be prohibited. Ibim kom mitzvah shetehen mutarot, ishelo bimkom mitzvah shetehen asurot. And in that case, if you permitted both the erva and the cowife in the case of Yibbum, then you'd have, in the case of Yibbum, both are permitted, and otherwise both would be prohibited, and that would be an impossible reading of the pasuk. After all, the pasuk does say legalot erva, which is singular. There has to be some case in which the erva is prohibited and the cowife is permitted, and so that proves it must got to be the other way around that we said before, and that is in fact the bottom line and the halacha, which is that in the case of Yibbum, both the erva and the cowife are prohibited. In the non-case of Yibbum, one's relative is always going to be prohibited, but a relative's cowife is permitted. All right, last point. Going back to Gufa, Rabbi Omer v'lakach ulkacha v'yibem v'yibemaha. Right, remember that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said that we learned from the extra he here and here le'esor sarot va'arayot. That the Rabbi learns from here that one is prohibited both from the you cannot do Yibbum if someone is a relative is an arayot and to her cowife. Mideh sarot ketiva hacha, and we question the Rabbi, where do you see sarot here? Right, we just see two words, doesn't say anything about cowife. Ve'od sarot milisror nafka. We already have a derivation that cowives are prohibited from the word lisror. So what's going on here? We'll answer both questions. Lisror mapik le Rabbi ke de Rabbi Shimon. The word lisror, he uses that for something completely different. What Rabbi Shimon says. We're not going to bring this source here. Rabbi Shimon's talking about a case where two brothers are married to two sisters, and both brothers die. And there's another brother who can do Yibbum. So what does he do in that case? And he says lisror. No, he can't. Even that a third brother who's not related to anybody still may not perform Yibbum. Okay, so that's why he says lisror. So that resolves the second question. But the first question was, where do you see Sarah here at all? Sarah hachaketib hachikamar imken lemakera velakach mai ulkacha kol hechadika tere likuchin. From the pasuk that says, and then he shall marry. He shall take. It has to mean. So it could just say he shall take. When he says he shall take her, it means that he had an option of whom to take. If I could look at the pasuk again, right? And he will take this one. So in other words, it only applies in a case where if he wanted nasib hai, where a man is married to two women and he dies, all not related. So then the Yavam can say, I could decide, I want to do Yibbum with this one or with that one. In that case, Sharia, one could marry either wife, either co-wife. Ve'ilah tarvaihu asirin. But if not, if one of the co-wives is a relative of his daughter, his wife's sister, and he would be prohibited from that one, in such a case, he doesn't have a choice. And so if you don't have a choice, then you cannot say velakach ota. It was only lakach. You only one option. So if there's only one option, then there's zero options. You can't do Yibbum at all. You can only do Yibbum when a man has two wives and dies. You can only do Yibbum when one would be permitted to either of them. Good. Bimkom Yibbum. Now that's what we learned from Mulkacha. V'yibema, what does he do with that? Bimkom Yibbum hu de asira sara. Shelo bimkom Yibbum sharia sara. The word Yibema teaches that only in a case of Yibbum, that's when my wife's sister's co-wife is prohibited. But if it was not a case of Yibbum, where my wife's sister's husband divorced his other wife, then that would be permitted. Okay, that's all Rabbi learns all those things. So last point, Rabbanan who do not agree with Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's derasha of lukacha and Yibemaha, how do they derive these laws? Hai ulkacha my avidle, or rather, what will they do with that word ulkacha? Meba'elehu lichad Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina. Damar Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina. Ulkacha melamed she megarsha beget umachazira. That says ulkacha, right? Lo leisha. That from we learn from that Yavam, should he perform Yibbum with his brother's wife, that's good. He did a mitzvah. And let's say they get into a fight and they divorce. And after he can divorce. First of all, you have to divorce because it's a full marriage. And let's say after they divorce, they reconcile and want to get married again. Do you say, oh, that was your brother's wife? That's not allowed. It was only allowed for Yibbum. But now you're not doing Yibbum. No, we don't say that. We say you can do marriage. Once, if you do Yibbum, then you're fully married like anyone else. And just like anyone else, if he's not, as long as he's not a Kohen, he can get divorced and bring her back. That's what it says. V'lakach, not just lakach, but lakach ota, even again, should he want to, should it happen. V'ibemaha al korchan. From we learn a difficult halacha, which is that the Yavam can force himself upon the Yevamah, and that would would bind them together. Unlike kiddushin, where the woman has to be agreeable, in this case, the Yibbum would take effect even if it was done by force. So that's how Rabbanan. That's what Rabbanan do with those two pisukim. Okay, back to the B. Has Rabbi know that law that once you do Yibbum, you need to divorce, and if you divorce, you can marry again. From the next word, right? He learns it from there. There's no mapik in the hair of isha. This is a mistake, right? Lakach oto ulkacha halo leisha. Okay. V'nafka al korcha miyevama yavo aleha. And how does Rabbi know that even Yibbum by force is still takes effect? He'll learn that from. Now he can't learn it from Yibemaha because he already used it for something else, but rather he'll learn it from Yavo aleha. That he shall come upon her, no matter what, whether willing or by force. That's how he learns it. And so now everyone learns the derash, uses all the pisukim and learns all the halachot that the other had. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen. V'amen.